Welcome, viewers, to Speaking of Our Words, a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. We will be bringing you in this format a series of videos to allow you, the viewer, the opportunity to experience the oral reading of the work of local writers, a rare opportunity. Additionally, for your enjoyment and to give you insight into their creative process, we will interview the writers right here about their work. I'm Marshall Smith, and I'm your host. I'm a published poet and studied creative writing in the MFA program at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. Today, Richard Bell of the Kenosha Writers Guild will read from his book and talk to us about his work. Rich, a hearty welcome.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thanks for coming. What do you have for us today?
I have my book. It's titled Life Seemed Good, But, a collection of short, quirky stories. Someone had told me not to use the word quirky in the title, so naturally I had to use it.
Okay, very good. Will you read something for us?
Yes, I will. This is the very first story that starts the book. It's called My Pet Spud. Some time ago, I bought a sack of russet potatoes at the grocery store. When I found a lone tater hiding in my pantry several months later, I noticed it had developed eyes all over its body, so I carefully plucked them out until there were two left. With these eyes perfectly formed and placed on this oblong, human head-shaped potato, it gave the distinct impression that it was alive in the same sense you and I share that definition and experience. Fascinated, I stared at it for hours and sensed that it was aware of my presence. I told the unemployment office I was looking for work in order to get my check, but I was totally preoccupied with this peculiar potato and the hold it had over me. After about 2 weeks, something quite extraordinary happened. The potato actually connected to my mind and spoke a word that sounded like "fark." I swear this is true, and I wasn't on blue meth or anything. I named him Spud. Call me greedy, but it soon became apparent that one pet potato was not enough. Feeling the urge to have more, Spud and I went out and selected an additional dozen at the market. I drew a different face on each so I could tell them apart since they didn't have eyes yet, and wrote their names on the back of their heads. A week later, these new potatoes were thinking as well, thanks in part to Spud's influence. Having 13 intelligent potatoes was deemed to be unlucky, and they convinced me to continue adding to their number. Then the question became, was there a way to refine the process to trigger each new potato's awareness more quickly and over greater distances? Spud inspired me to fashion a hat of aluminum foil, put it on, and sit in a dark closet. While in there, I hummed like a bee and concentrated on the great potato spirit. After 20 minutes, there was a sudden, brilliant flash of light in my mind, as though I had been contacted from another world. Upon leaving the closet, I discovered I had gained mystical abilities limited only by my imagination. Now we were able to liberate tubers by the hundreds, simply by strolling through the produce section and giving them the eye. I routinely visited local food stores and occasionally traveled to supermarkets in nearby cities. We agreed to give away the 12 as ambassadors and overseers to various store managers, but keep Spud, whom I carry in a leather pouch hanging from my belt, for myself. As weeks went by, I pictured myself at the head of an enormous potato army thundering across the fruited plains. I was somebody special, all right. Then one evening at dinner, it struck me. I considered the fate of my potatoes and realized that each one was being eaten, alive. They were being prepared and cooked with their consciousness intact in all sorts of horrible ways. Instead of being their grand liberator, I had become a villain, condemning thousands of innocent potatoes to a conscious awareness of their own deaths. All except the first potato. I could never eat him. But now, Spud has turned and become my tormentor, and a constant reminder of the unimaginable evil I have done. Every day begins with, "Good morning, fark, I hate you," and then he starts telling me what a bad person I am and dredging up things from my past. Despite trying to reason with him, he refuses to accept any responsibility for what we did together. What's more, I suspect that mushrooms have been watching me. They're sneaky little things. They think I don't notice, but I do. I am now going to lock myself in the cellar until this whole thing blows over. If you'd like to join me, I'll tell you a few stories I know.
That's great fun. That's great fun. So, Rich, how long have you been writing?
I started writing back in 2004 when as therapy when my wife got leukemia, and then shortly after that we got laid off from our jobs. It was a way to pass the time and try to cheer myself up during a dark time in my life, because I was afraid I was going to lose the woman I loved that I almost did. But step into the distant past, when my brother and I were younger, we used to screw around with my mom's typewriter and make up stories and laugh at the misspelled words that we created.
Sounds fun. So I'm interested in that last piece there. You and another piece I read of yours, I think called Grilled Cheese, how you seem to animate the inanimate and bring life to it. And in so doing, you actually seem to imbue moral and ethical choices into these formerly inanimate and now animated objects, as in the grilled cheese sandwich and the spud. How do your writing ideas come to you?
That's a good question. A lot of people accuse me of being on drugs, but I've never done that to write a story. Editing is another story. That's but anyway, how do I get my ideas? Sometimes I just sit down and force myself to start writing and see where it goes, and then most of those stories get ended by being deleted. But every once in a while there'll be something in there that I can build on later on. And sometimes it's just a concept that I think needs to be brought to a story. Sometimes it's revenge on a person who's pissed me off, and I make a story about them and have a bad ending, but I don't actually name who they are.
And they never find out?
They never find out. The stories are also, in a weird way, an autobiography.
Tell us about that.
Different things from my past that have made an impression that I can put in the stories. For instance, the story about the amoebas. There's an amoeba that's traveling around kissing girl amoebas because he thinks every amoeba is a girl amoeba, and he's trying to, be friendly. So at the very end, one of them yells at him and shames him and says to him, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Which goes back to a thing that happened to me when I was in the Navy. And the first time I screwed up and I got yelled at, and I thought, well, I can just ignore this until it goes away. And the guy yelled at me, he said, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," and I had to endure that. So it stuck with me, and I thought that would be a good thing to put in a story. Even though the story isn't about that in particular, it's a memory.
It's an echo from the past.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you have something else that you can read for us now?
You mentioned the grilled cheese sandwich, so I'll read that one next. Not long ago, there was a grilled cheese sandwich that came suddenly into conscious existence as a result of an order at a cafeteria combined with a mysterious miracle. His bread was toasty brown and his cheese nicely melted. He felt satisfied with being a grilled cheese sandwich, and life seemed good. All around him were clean, shiny aluminum surfaces and cabinets. There was also an aroma he couldn't quite place. It smelled kind of like cheese, and he wondered if he had farted without knowing it. He was sitting there a while, trying to count his toes, when a spatula came and lifted him up. As he was removed from the grill, he noticed an older woman staring at him intently, and he heard the cook tell her that her sandwich was almost ready. Was he the sandwich being spoken of? He assumed so and hoped she would be nice to him. Shortly thereafter, he found himself plopped onto a styrofoam plate, so he sat there contentedly, waiting to see what might happen next. He was joined by a ripe green pickle, which he believed would be his lifelong friend and companion. A minute later, some extremely hot French fries jostled into him, and he felt like he had a real family now. The plate was then handed to the lady, who took him away from the only home he had ever known. She brought him and his traveling companions into the cool air of the dining area. He looked around with astonishment at this new and dazzling world, but then had a disturbing vision of other grilled cheese sandwiches that appeared to be in different stages of being all there. Setting the tray on the table, she sat, picked him up, and blew on him for a while, which tickled. Then she slowly brought him to her lips, which were opening wider as he approached. All at once it dawned on him what was happening. "Stop! Don't do this!" he shouted in panic. "I have my rights. You put me down this instant." He called out to the Fries for help, but they were frozen with terror. There was no escape, and how unfair it all seemed. Who knows, he contemplated sadly. I might have grown up to become a club sandwich, or maybe even a cheeseburger. Desperately, he screamed, I am grilled cheese sandwich and I want to live, while glaring at her. All she noticed was the chatter of the cafeteria. He watched his brief life flash before his eyes, and then she took a bite out of him and chewed. It did not hurt like he expected it to. In fact, he felt nothing at all. He seemed to be as intact as when he left the grill. The Fries went bravely to their fate, not a whimper from any of them, and the pickle sat there, ignored and oblivious to it all. When the lady came to her last bite of Mr. Sandwich, he found himself floating in space without a body and saw a bright light approaching, which he gazed at peacefully. The light turned out to be the light above the grill in the cooking area, and he realized he had come back as another grilled cheese sandwich. Fate can be a cruel joker.
That's fun, very fun. And there's a lot going on in there. It's interesting. Now, so how would you describe or characterize your writing?
That story speaks of death, of course. But I would characterize mine as humorous satire, some dark humor, comedy, brutal reality, philosophy, escapism, life in general, and just plain silliness.
Okay. That's a smorgasbord we can choose from.
Mm-hmm.
So when you write a piece like that, and your others as well, how long does it take you to write that? Do you sit down in one sitting and write that out, or does this go over a period of days or weeks, or how does that work?
Well, as I mentioned, I started writing in 2004, and I finished the book last year in 2017, which is it took me 13 years to write this book. So I'd set it aside for months at a time, come back to it. And I like to tell people that this book was actually written by several different people, all of them me. Because I grew, I matured in the intervening years, and I'd come back and I'd look at something and go, that's really stupid, or that's really immature, and then adjust it a little bit. And then come back later and go, well, that word doesn't fit there exactly, this would be better. I rearrange the paragraphs, the sentences sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, that word could be this word, and I could add that and make it funnier, and I'd write it down and go back to sleep. So, and then there were several stories that were in the original that got left out because they didn't fit into the theme of the Misty Forest.
That's very interesting, the way you described that, the editing process and obsessing over words, syntax, diction, where you're going to. So you torture over that to some extent.
In addition to that, I went through the entire book with a Word program and counted the number of times certain words were used, common words like walked, said, went, and if it was too many, I'd look for a different word. Especially the word because was in there so many times that I thought, well, what could I use instead of that? I used the word for. F-O-R. So as things like that, and that took about a couple of weeks to do all of that. And then I'd read it some more. The last edit was really sitting, getting my oil changed, and I brought the book in with me and reading in the middle of the book, and I discovered that there was a story that I'd gone over many, many times, but there was a word missing. And I was thunderstruck. It's like, how could I have missed this all these times? Because I would read it and I would assume it was there, and I would kind of graze over that part, but it wasn't there. And
what kind of word was it that was missing?
A little word like for.
Okay. Okay, interesting.
So I started out, it cost me $25, that little mistake.
Oh, well, you learned from that economically.
I started writing, well, when I decided to put everything together in a book, it was like around 2009. And the stories had just been sitting around gathering dust, and there was a lot of them that didn't make it into the book because they were just dumb, and I admit that. But I started with Smashwords, if people are familiar with that. It's a free program. They publish an ebook for you. After that, I went to CreateSpace, which is now merged with Kindle, and that's also free. You can do as many edits as you want, and they won't charge you for it. But if you want your book in the stores like Barnes & Noble, you have to go through Ingram Spark. And they'll charge you $25 every time you want to make a change. So you better be darn sure it's finished to where you like it before you go with them.
So before you read one more, I want to ask you something that you mentioned that interests me a great deal. I'm always fascinated with how writers change over time. And you mentioned it's written by several different Richard Bells. Mm-hmm. And so what causes you to change and perceive and evaluate your work differently, say 2 years later? Is it writing that other writers you've read? Is it you're just getting more mature, getting better? I mean, if you could just talk about that a little bit, because it's a very fascinating subject for writers.
When I first started, as I said, my wife had leukemia, and then shortly after that we got laid off for our job. So I spent 11 years doing temp jobs in unemployment, trying to find a real job again. Luckily I have one now, so knock on wood, I can keep it, right? So part of that was the different situations I was in, the ups and the downs. I had a good temp job for 2 years. I got kicked out of that. So it's life experiences like that. When I was younger, I read a lot in high school. The classics like Dracula, Frankenstein, H.G. Wells. Then I discovered Kurt Vonnegut Jr. and I read Cat's Cradle. And that was kind of an eye-opener because I never saw anybody that could write stream of consciousness, say what they were thinking, and get away with it like this guy did. And Cat's Cradle is kind of a model for Life Seemed Good, but each chapter is different. They're all kind of loose tied together. Same with the book. This takes place in the Misty Forest. There's talking animals, vegetables, sandwiches, and my adventures with aluminum foil, specifically aluminum foil hats. Okay,
with your pet Spud. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was fun. So do you have another piece you can read for us?
Yes. This is the very first story that I wrote, and I should tell you, when I first wrote it, I was at work. We hadn't got laid off yet. My wife was in the hospital. And it's a different version now. It's not what it was because the original was kind of stupid, but when I first finished it, I started laughing so hard I had to go into my desk because I didn't want people to think I was cracking up, which actually I was, because of the stress that was on me. And it was just taking its form in this way instead of like crying or going nuts. But I realized later on that the story wasn't as funny as I thought it was because I went to share it with people and they're like, oh yeah, okay. I'm like, don't you see how funny this is? So.
Well, you entertained yourself.
Yeah, this is called Some Party. In a faraway part of the Misty Forest, there lived a martini-drinking cow named Ernie, a clever rabbit called Quicksilver, and a mangy old tiger named Scraps. One finite summer day, around 2 p.m, the cow was feeling a bit hungry. Since cows secretly love to eat rabbits, Ernie telephoned every rabbit in the phone directory to see who would answer. Finally, someone did. Oh, crap, thought Quicksilver, hearing Ernie's voice. Hey, come to my little party, said the cow, slurring his words. I have a fun new game we can play. This is Ernie, your friend. Ernie belched into the phone. Quicksilver reflected before responding. After all, his wife and kids had recently been to one of the cow's parties and hadn't been seen since, nor her gold pendant. Okay, Mr. Cow, be over soon, he replied and hung up. The rabbit thought a bit and called his cousin Scraps the tiger at the brewery and told him of an idea he had. The tiger might go to the party disguised as Quicksilver in order to see what would take place and maybe find out what happened to his family and many missing friends. It seemed like a good idea, so Scraps finished labeling another pallet of old Warthog beer, went and rented a rabbit suit and gloves, and set out for the cow pasture. On his way, he passed an old she-goat that asked in a sing-song voice, Where are you going this finite day with yourself all dressed up like that? I'm going to some party with Ernie the cow. Come on along, said the tiger cheerfully. The goat agreed and hobbled happily along behind Scraps. After a half hour of travel and light conversation, they arrived at the pasture where the mischievous cow was sunning himself and getting buzzed on dirty martinis. "Hello, Mr. Cow," said the tiger in a high, thin voice. "That's a very nice gold pendant you have around your neck. May I ask where you got it?" "Hello there, Runny Babbit, Bunny Fabbit, Furry Runny Mabbit, Babbit, hi," mumbled the cow, unaware of much beside the spinning pasture and his own big feet. "Is it party time?" asked Scraps as tension filled the air. The goat glanced around sheepishly, then ran like a scaredy cat to the house on the hill. "Cow hungry," bellowed Ernie, regaining some of his composure and staring off into the distance. "Come here and put this apple in your mouth," he ordered, baring his teeth. Scraps took a running start and jumped onto the cow's back, tipping him over and spilling his drink. "Looky here," roared Scraps. "I am the king of the rabbits, and I'm here to find out what's going on." "What?" Ernie said. "I want to know what's been going on here." "What?" Ernie said again. "What have you been doing with these rabbits?" "What?" Ernie repeated, suppressing a smile. "You heard me," Scraps yelled. "Who is John Galt?" asked Ernie. "I don't know. Look, I'm a rabbit. See the ears and the tail? Tell me about your parties. I hear you really like bunnies, right?" "What?" Ernie said, starting to giggle. "You're beginning to piss me off, you drunken cow. I suspect they're all dead if you're the kind of mad cow that likes to eat rabbits." "What?" 10 minutes later, the old goat returned with 2 unsuspecting chickens carrying a pot of water, only to witness the tiger chasing the cow across the infinite horizon and heard the distant cry of "Cow hungry." "Oh, crap," said the goat sarcastically. "Some party."
Nice. That's fun. Thank you. So when you begin writing a piece like that one, or really any of the others, do you know how it's going to end when you start, or does it kind of write itself as you go, or how does that all work for you creatively?
I don't know how it's going to end. Sometimes I'll start a bunch of stories and just let them sit until something pops into my head. Sometimes I start with the ending and put the beginning in first. So they're all different. I'm not writing the book any longer, so these are kind of all finished, but I do write a monthly column for a What's Up local magazine in Lake County, Illinois. And a lot of the stories started there as well, after the initial ones that I wrote. It's called Modern Fables. And a lot of the stories, I'm on a monthly deadline now, and I got certain requirements to keep them all under 450 words. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of an impetus to me to continue writing. But for the last year and a half, I've been doing The Adventures of Scooter and Biff, which are 2 characters from my book that kind of represent me and my brother when we were younger, like around 10 or 11 years old. So a lot of the stories, and if I might do a book about them if I get enough of them collected together, just as short vignettes, one after the other, instead of a continuing work where it's just, a beginning, a middle, and an end. These have their own built-in middles and ends.
So we're getting short on time. Let me ask you, why do you write? What motivates you to write? If you can answer, if you can think of what philosophically is part of your need to write?
Like I said, it started as therapy.
Right.
But the main reason is I like to laugh.
Ah.
And I like to make other people laugh. That gives me a sense of fulfillment. And God knows we could use more laughter in this country and, a lighter mood. I also give some of the money to cancer research from the proceeds of the book because my wife did survive, and I feel kind of a debt of gratitude to the doctors and the researchers who put all this stuff together that enabled that. So a portion goes to actually locally to Rosalind Franklin University in North Chicago, where they use the money for actual research instead of fundraising expenses, administrative costs, salaries, things like that. So I know every dollar is being used wisely.
What do you think appeals to people about your writing?
Somebody put in one of my reviews that they're characters that a child would be attracted to, but the situations often are not. So there's a kid in all of us that looks for, fairy tales for grown-ups. I describe it as a cross between Aesop's Fables and the Brothers Grimm.
Okay, okay. So, are there particular writers, you mentioned writers you read in high school or in your youth or in school in the past, who no doubt are influencing you today. Are there writers that you read today that influence you?
I'm kind of stuck in a rut in that. I like to read an author named Rex Stout, who wrote a series of books about Nero Wolfe, the detective series. And I'll start at the beginning. There's 40-some books. I'll start at the beginning, go all the way through, like a year later, start over again. I've done that several times, but I've kind of put it on hold now because I've been too myopic on that, I think. So I'm expanding a little bit more into other things. I've got some books that were published like around 1920 that I've been going through that I got from my wife's great-grandmother, which are kind of interesting. So it's a different perspective. But it's a compilation of everything that I've read in my life, I think.
Do you write every day?
No.
Once a week? Do you have some sort of pattern?
I'm on a monthly deadline for the magazine articles, so I'll do like once or twice a week, maybe put it aside for several days. When the urge strikes me, I'll go back.
Morning, evening, either one?
I shouldn't say this, but I usually write at work when I should be working.
I think you mentioned that earlier. Your first piece was written at work,
Yeah.
I recall correctly. So where will we find your book, or how do we find your work?
It's in the local Barnes & Nobles in Vernon Hills and Racine. It's on Amazon, Kindle, Smashwords, and for stores that want to buy it that have a return policy, it's on Ingram Spark.
Are you working on another book?
No.
Not now.
If I do, it'll be a book explaining everything in this book. One of these days I'd like to do that. But this one has to become popular first.
Okay, okay, okay. Well, very nice, very nice. So I want to thank you, Rich, very much for sharing your work with us.
Thank you.
And answering my questions and sharing with the audience your creative process. I think that was great. I want to thank you graciously for coming, and thank you, audience, for listening. Again, this is Speaking of Our Words, and it is a production of the Kenosha Writers Guild. Please come to one of our meetings, which are on the second and third Thursdays of each month at 6:30 p.m. at Carthage College. The meetings are open to anyone, and we welcome your attendance. Please visit our website at KenoshaWritersGuild.com or like our Facebook page, and feel free to leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Until the next video, I'm Marshall Smith. Goodbye.